Hello, welcome back to Sharks Happen. My name is Hal. I'm your host, going over shark attacks from the 1900s till present, mostly large sharks, and we'll get started right away. We're going to head over to Bass Strait, which is off of Phillip Island in Victoria, Australia. The date is November 22nd, 1989. Gary White, 32 years old, he was out doing some surfing with a buddy. They're 100 yards from shore, and suddenly Gary's hit hard from the bottom. And a shark grabs him and takes him underwater. His buddy with him says that he looks over and the water is just frothing. It's boiling is what a lot of them call it when these large sharks hit like that. Water's thrashing, and seconds later Gary pops to the top of the water, and two pieces, his board was split in half, so two sides of his board popped up to the water. Gary struggled his way to get into the shallows, at which point his buddy helped him get inshore, get in a car, and took him to the hospital. He ended up with 27 stitches to his thigh. So the shark probably grabbed his thigh and the board at the same time and took all of it under the water, and the board ended up splitting, probably due to the heavy buoyancy of the board and the break to the center of it where he was bit in the leg. So that's a survival and attack. Okay, now we're going to head over to Egg Rock. The attack took place about 6 kilometers north of the old Roseville Bridge. This is in Middle Harbour, New South Wales, Australia. The date is January 4th, 1942. Zita Steadman, 28 years old. Her and a group of friends took a motor launch out to Egg Rock, and they're going to picnic for the day. It's just before 3 o'clock. They're all in the water. Most of them are standing in the shallows. Zita is standing out in waist deep water, and the bottom goes out 25 feet, pretty shallow, and then there's a drop off. So 25 feet offshore, there's a deep drop off there, which, you know, that's sharky area right there. So she's standing there, and all of a sudden she's hit by the shark. Shark comes and grabs her. Mr. Bose is one of the group that's there, grabs an oar from the boat and goes over there and starts hitting the shark with the oar. While the shark doesn't stop the attack, it keeps repeatedly hit her, and now that he's hitting it with the oar, it's dragging her out to deeper water. So now he's got to go. He runs, gets in a rowboat, and rows his way out there and tries to ram the shark with the rowboat. He's not able to do that. So luckily he's able to get Zita by her hair, and he's having a tug of war now with the body. He ends up saving the top half of her body. She was bitten clean in half. A 13.5-foot bull shark. So a huge bull shark came out of that deep water and attacked her. That's about as big as they come, 13.5 foot. Maybe they come a little bit bigger, but that's about the max. So you're running into the biggest bull shark there is. Definitely not in a good mood, and definitely an attempt to predation and a fatality. She ended up dying from her wounds. Like I said, she was bit in half, and only Mr. Bowe's quick work was able to save her, grab her by her hair. He was able to watch the other half of her body disappear in deeper water. And that's our attack on Zita Steadman. Attack predation, we'll move on. Okay, now we head over to Surf Beach, which is off the coast of California in northern Santa Barbara County. The date is October 23rd, 2012. Francisco Solorio Jr. is out with 3 friends, and they're doing some surfing. It's about 11 o'clock, and he's landing on this board. He's about 100 yards from shore, 10 to 12 foot deep water. Laying on his board, facing the sea, probably waiting on a wave. All of a sudden he's hit by a shark. A friend says he looks over, and the shark's got him and his board on a one-hit bite, dragging him off of his board and into the water. The friend gets over there as fast as he can, gets him up out of the water, puts him on his board, and brings him in, but there was nothing that was going to help him. This is just like Lewis Boren. It was real close to being a Lewis Boren. 15 to 16 foot great white, and like I said, when they hit the boards, it's a different deal than when those little 10, 12 footers hit the boards. It's not a good thing when they're hitting your board usually, especially when it thinks that you're something else, like I think this did. Just like with Lewis Boren, one hit, just devastating. It went through his torso, so he's laying on his board, and right at the center of the board you can see the piece, the mouth bite on the board goes to the center of the board, right where the center of your body would be. it looks like it was just maybe an inch or two, just in a centimeter or so from breaking through the board, just like with Solorio. And I think that's the only thing that stopped the shark from taking the whole chunk out when he was doing it, was the board. He didn't get through the board. They said that he suffered traumatic injuries to his torso. It ripped into his back really good. And like I said, I would be surprised if the teeth didn't hit the board on top. So it probably went right through him and hit the board. They don't really get into it very much, but just the look of the bottom of the board alone, because that takes, less of the brunt of the bite usually. The fact it went almost through the board, that was just devastating. Mistaken identity for sure, I would call that. An attack, no attempt to predate. Okay, now we're going to head over quickly to Hawaii, to Kapahau Beach. The date is June 25th, 1951. Alejandro Nodura, they don't say his age, he's out just standing in the water doing some fishing, and a wave comes and sweeps him out into the deeper part of the water. And there's not any details. It's from 1951, and they say that it's fatal, and he was last seen in a shark's mouth. So, I doubt that he was drowned at that time. The water took him out, and shark probably did the rest. So I'm going to put this down as an attack and a predation. No other information, and that'll do it for Alejandro. Okay, now we're going to finish out our unprovoked attacks off the coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean at Margate. The date is December 30th, 1957. Julia Painting, 14 years old. Her and her family, they're at the beach. The beach is crowded, 2,000 people on the beach. They're standing amongst hundreds of bathers in the water. So there's hundreds of people in there. Julie's standing there with her uncle, her 15-year-old cousin, and a 36-year-old Paul Brokenshaw. They're all standing in knee-deep water. They're 50 meters from shore, and it's just before 1 o'clock. It's about 12:40. And Julia says she notices out of the right corner of her eye a dark shape coming up out of the rocks. So there's some rocks off to the right, and she sees a dark shape coming out of there, heading their way. She says she looks a little bit closer and she can see the two fins pop out of the water. Now the water's clear. They say the water's perfectly clear and it's calm, and the only thing that's disturbing the water is when the tide rolls in and rolls out, it's just picking up some sand and bringing it with it. So pretty clear water. She sees that there's two fins, and this could be kind of a what were you thinking. She instinctively, it says, she stepped in front of the shark to block its path, I guess, from it getting into her friends or something. I don't know. This is a full beach, so I'd be moving away from it myself. But she stepped in front of it, and they get into it. She weighs about 114 pounds. Like I said, 14 years old. And she steps in front of this, and the shark grazes her. It hits her leg as it's going by. That knocks her into the water. And as soon as she hits the water, that shark turns on her and grabs her. And it probably grabbed her the first time, did a bite to the thigh, just below her rear end at the upper thigh. It bit down on that and got her hand at the same time. So one of the wounds is probably the first one grabbing her like that. Now Paul Brokenshaw, the 36-year-old, he grabs the shark by the tail and starts dragging it back away from her, and the shark just flicks its tail and throws him off. And now it goes back to Julia. She must have rolled over or done something to try to get away, because now it's got her other arm. It grabs her hand. Paul Brokenshaw comes up and he starts beating on the shark, and he ends up getting defensive wounds on his fist. So he tries to drag Julia away from the shark. Well, the shark at that point works its way from her hand all the way up her shoulder, biting down on it the whole way up. And Julia said it sounded like a pig grunting doing this. I'm sure because of the bone, the teeth coming out and scraping back as it's going in. So she's probably hearing all that bone, the water sloshing, probably sounded like grunting. As it gets all the way up to the top of her arm, it does one last bite, and her arm is clean off. And now the shark, probably because it has now an arm in its mouth it might not have been planning on, takes a second and then goes back to bite her, while Paul Brokenshaw picks her up and throws her to her uncle. Her uncle walks her to the beach, and they end up getting her help. She ends up surviving this attack. It was a 1.8 meter great white that did the attack. So you're talking a 6-foot great white, which doesn't sound big, but 6-foot great whites are big sharks. 6-foot bull sharks are big sharks. So 6-foot great whites are really big sharks. They have plenty of weight to them, and you know, they're born just like a regular great white. They're just smaller, so they have all the working teeth that come out and rake back as they bite. All that happens as soon as the white's born. At that size, you know, I have a few attacks of those smaller ones. We had that one, it's a 7-footer that bit that guy in the chest, but it was hooked. These sharks don't care about people when they're that size. You don't normally hear about small sharks attacking people. But this one ended up attacking her, and probably because it, you know, she fell next to it. Otherwise, it probably would have went on its way and not bothered anybody. But it ended up doing so. So she ended up with a bite mark to her thigh. So she had a nice wound to her thigh and her hand. So her hand was probably at her side when it got bit. And then she had some of those abrasive wounds to her stomach and to her leg from when the shark was on her, I'm sure. And then the left arm is taken off, but you can see the radius of the shark's bite, because that last bite not only took her arm, but it goes and it just clips her breast, and it gets a little bigger as it goes to her back. So that bite went all the way through her side, all the way out the back. They did extensive surgery. She was a tennis player. She ended up finishing up playing tennis one-handed. And I'm not sure if she went back in the water, but you know, there's a really good write-up on this, and it's a really interesting story if you want to check it out. Julia painting 14 on attack. It is not an attempt to predate, even though it did all that damage. This was just a, you know, defensive type thing for the shark. Startled probably, and turned and did what they do. So that's our story of Julia painting, and we'll finish up the show with our What Were You Thinking? Okay, now we'll finish out our show with What Were You Thinking? Back in September 2006, Dave Marcel is down off the Florida Keys, off of Key Largo. He's swimming with 20 nurses. And he had been quoted before as saying, you know, you gotta kind of hug them and scratch them and rub their belly. And well, this time he kissed it. He had a 20 nurse shark flipped over. Looked like it's probably about a good 3-4 footer. Has it flipped over, and he goes in to give it a kiss. Well, that suction grabs his upper lip, and now it's got his upper lip. It shredded it. It pulled it off. The suction from that is so strong that it'll pull the clams and the shellfish right out of their shells. It'll break them right out of there. That's how strong the suction is. Now, you have to be within 3 centimeters of the suction to be affected by it, but he obviously kissed it within 3 centimeters of it. And he ended up with his lip pretty shredded. Dr. Mike Kelly worked on him and said Dave's lip looked like it had been put through a meat grinder. I mean, it was 100 little pieces. So he had some extensive reconstructive surgery on his lip. And that's our story of Dave Seymour. That's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, click like. I hope I'll see you here in a few days with another show full of attacks. And remember, if you go in that water, you are much more afraid of those sharks than they are of you.